Hey guys, Datix here, back with another Dragon Age the Veilguard video. This time talking Nightmare difficulty, which is the biggest challenge the game has to offer, and once you lock it in, you can't change it. Naturally, that means you need to find the right builds to get you through, and that's where I come in. This video contains my favorite and the strongest Nightmare builds for each class, meaning that no matter what class you choose, you'll have some way of getting through it all. I'll go through each build's pros and cons, show what skills and gear you need, as well as explain how it all works in practice. So, buckle up.
I'm Commander Shepard, and Dantix is my favorite channel on the Citadel.
You don't get the discount.
What?
So let's start with the Rogue. This build, focusing on the Saboteur specialization, is my favorite because it's fun to pilot, for my taste at least, and has a lot of tools, pun intended, for every job. Let's go through the positives. First of all their abilities are on a cooldown, meaning you won't be relying on your momentum to charge, so if you take a hit, you won't suddenly be completely out of options. Also, that means you'll always have an ability to cast in order to dodge attacks and spells. You see, casting an ability gives you invulnerability while the animation plays out. This comes into play with the ultimate, which I'll talk about soon. You'd think cooldowns would mean you would cast your abilities less often. Well, that's not true. You apply the quickened effect to yourself in many ways, and your ability, Explosive Trap, has only a 20-second cooldown, meaning you'll be getting it off multiple times a fight, much more often than a momentum using Rogue will be getting off their abilities. With Pilfer, which probably should have been Blood Magic, you have a way to self-heal, and on a cooldown, that means it's ready to go when you need it. By enchanting it, you can make it so it grants you 50 ultimate charge as well, making it so that only after 2 uses, you'll have your ultimate fully charged. It'll be less in most cases as you'll be fighting and gaining charge as well. Now, these might be builds for advanced players, but did you know that Wizards of the Coast just released a set for those wanting to get into Magic the Gathering? It's called Foundations, and it's the perfect starting point for those who want to dip their toes into the world of Magic. It includes a starter collection box with over 350 cards so you can build your own deck. These aren't unplayable outside of standard format as well, and the box contains a ton of rares which I've sneakily pulled out and popped into my commander decks. If you're even newer to the format, you can grab a beginner box that comes ready to play with decks and instructions how 2 people can play step by step against each other. Best of all though, this set has some powerful cards and some beautiful lands. The best card I pulled was this powerful Japanese showcase Progenitus. It costs a ton of mana but is basically immune to everything. We also have dinosaurs, dragons, vampires, and we even have this tiny skeleton burglar. So be sure to check the set out, and thanks to Wizards for sponsoring this video. Explosive Trap will be your bread and butter, and it has to be my favorite ability in the game. Like mentioned, it's a 20-second cooldown, but like Pilfer, it also detonates overwhelmed, so naturally we'll be using a warrior to apply the effect, either Davrin or Tash, with Tash being superior as she can passively apply the effect too with her Spitfire passive upgrade. But enchanting Explosive Trap, we can further reduce the cooldown down to 17 seconds. With Quickened Up, it's even shorter. The best thing about Explosive Trap though is that it does extremely high damage and throws enemies around. Even oversized enemies like dragons will stagger from the effect. You'll be playing an advanced game of bowling with this build, and that's perfect for Nightmare as it means you can instant kill annoying enemies. You also have Fortune's Turret. It places a turret that automatically fires on enemies for extreme damage. This thing outputs with one cast more damage than any other skill in the game by a huge amount. Don't let the tooltip fool you, it's doing a lot more than it says there. It says 2056, which is referring to the total amount of damage over its duration, but as you can see, well, it's doing a lot more. It also pulls aggro from you at times, and if destroyed, explodes in a similar effect to your Explosive Trap. This is Nightmare difficulty. Staying away from enemies and setting and forgetting abilities to damage over time is valuable, which is why we enchant it with plus 40% attack speed. Absolutely redonkulous. Now, finally, we have the ultimate, Fortune's Fury, which gets out a cannon and continually fires. Because you're aiming, it's one of the only ultimates that gets your weak point damage bonuses, and this build has a ton of ways to buff that. Best of all, like hinted at, the whole duration you're firing, you're immortal. Even massive dragons will have to wait until you're done blasting before they can hurt you. And this ultimate lasts a long time. It's the ultimate Nightmare oh shit button. Some more positives, you have a large focus on ranged damage, and dodging back and keeping at range keeps you alive. Sniping idiots at range with extremely high damage means you can output more before they get to you. With the Bombard rune, you can slow down time as well to line them up, and even with a mage like Emmerich, you can slow time as well. This build also comes online fairly quickly, as the core skills you need are the greater passive, some motivation for a huge spike in damage output relative to your maximum arrow count, as well as the ability Explosive Trap. You can start wrecking Nightmare before you even get your specialization. This build also has the benefit of dealing physical damage, meaning you won't ever run into resistances that hinder your output. The negatives of this build aren't many. It's not the tankiest build, and although it has a way to self-heal, if you use the more of the Black City unique ring, you'll be burning through your health. You also can't cast the same ability twice in succession because of the cooldown mechanics, but that's never a problem. You rather be consistently putting them out, and being able to cast 3 abilities back to back makes up for it. Also, though physical damage is a benefit in most cases, it also means you won't be doing bonus damage to an enemy type, besides the odd necrotic weapons coming in handy against undead, but you won't be focusing on that effect with this build. Now, I recommend checking out my more advanced breakdown of this build, link in the description, if you want to know the nitty gritty of why there are so many passives that stack with gear and vice versa. I'll put the skills I recommend getting on screen, so feel free to pause if you just need to know what to get and don't want the details. Also, these are the items I recommend, though there is no efficient way to give you a guide how to get them, as legendary items are upgraded from rare, which is upgraded from uncommon, and so on. You upgrade them by finding or buying a duplicate item, so in most cases you'll need to find 4 of the same item. Just look around stores and be sure to explore for chests. The more of the Black City though can be found in the crossroads at the giant corrupted tree by killing 50 Darkspawn in the area and then entering. For companions, Emmerich and Tash are my picks, but feel free to experiment. I run through the reasonings in the build video. Now moving over to Mage, I find the most powerful build edging out the Spellblade is the Deathcaller build. I didn't want this to be the case, as it's not the most flashy build to say the least, but it has so much damage output and sustain that it beats out the Spellblade overall on Nightmare. So let's first take a look at its positives. The biggest overall is that the build is not reliant on your abilities at all, meaning that you can just ignore them, ignore mana, and ignore your cooldowns, and simply play with your ranged attack, which is the beam in both the staff and orb weapon loadouts. You need the specialization passives to buff this ranged attack, but when you have them, you can overcharge the beam to deal double damage, but it in turn consumes twice as much mana. You can upgrade it so it heals you based on a percentage of the damage you deal. You can upgrade it so you fire a pulse while the beam is out to detonate the Sundered effect, meaning you don't need to rely on your abilities to combo with your team. This also means that out of all the builds I'm showcasing, this one can combo the easiest and most often, as you essentially have detonation on a stick. All you need is the companions in Harding, who can heal you and set up Sundered, and Lucanus, who can buff your damage output and apply Sundered as well. I digress, all your beam-based skills, like the ability to detonate and the ability to double damage, cost health instead of mana when you're low, meaning you can continually output damage even when you have no mana. Since you're leeching health, you'll never be dropping. Using the ability Spirit Bomb sets the siphoned effect on an enemy, meaning you'll be leeching even more health from them with a damage over time effect that heals you for what damage it deals. This ability also detonates Sundered. Corrupted Ground is usually my go-to opener, as it spreads effects around to enemies in a large radius due to upgrades, and with the enchantment, it also leeches life back for us, letting us burn through mana with reckless abandon. We also have the skill Frost Nova, which becomes necrotic based damage with a passive upgrade in the Deathcaller tree. This is good because you won't have the mana most times to spend on abilities, and freezing enemies in place means you can easily hold out your channeled beam on their weak points without being swarmed. You also, if you get a second to breathe, can easily regenerate your mana with a button press. The damage output with this build is surprisingly high, and it's very hard to die, as all 2 of your abilities heal you, your main form of attacking heals you, and your ultimate gives you immunity while it heals you, so it's perfect for Nightmare difficulty. In terms of negatives, it has a few more than the Rogue. First, it does require you to get your specialization passives and abilities to really come online, which is unlike the Saboteur build. Also, since you're using mana to cast your ranged attack, you'll only get a small window to cast your mana-based abilities at the start of the fight, since you'll be draining your mana pool from that point on. Which is why it's good to have a cooldown-based ability in Frost Nova, which helps with the next point, being that you need to channel your beam range attack so you're vulnerable to being swarmed and being charged. The Saboteur can set and forget damage and pick opportunities to unleash powerful sniper shots. This build is more of a sustained, reliable soldier than a scrappy guerrilla fighter. This build also relies a lot on necrotic damage, and it's resisted by the very common darkspawn enemies in the game. It almost made me not showcase it, however even with high resistances to necrotic, you still output higher damage than other mage builds who have to worry about resistances of their own as well. You can also use an orb and staff with different damage types to avoid this problem, as your beam will do the damage of its type. I recommend checking out my more advanced breakdown of this build, link in the description, if you want to know the nitty gritty and why there are so many passives that stack with gear and vice versa. The only difference is I've updated the build and added the extra skills, including Frost Nova, which you replace Meteor with. For that build, I wanted it to be more for standard difficulty and be more fun. This is sacrificing that in order to crunch the numbers.
Crunch the numbers.
I'll put the skills I recommend getting on screen, so feel free to pause if you just need to know what to get and don't want the details. Also, these are the items I recommend, though there's no way to give you a guide to get them as legendary items are upgraded from rare and so forth like I mentioned before. So look around stores and be sure to explore for chests. The uniques aren't core in this build either. In terms of companions, I like Harding and Lucanus, though you can put in a warrior instead of Lucanus if you want to detonate weakened, or you can keep him for his impeccable timing upgrade to Adrenaline Rush, giving you passively increased damage and his ability to apply Sunder for you to detonate. Same with Harding, Sunder to detonate, but with her, she has a heal and a broken as hell Hero of the Veilguard passive, Heart of the Titan, though follow the build guide for more information. The last build I want to showcase is that of the Warrior class. I've yet to make a guide video highlighting the Reaper, and it just so happens to be my pick for the best to run in Nightmare difficulty, so different to the others, I'll go slightly more in depth in this showcase. This build has some extremely high sustain, able to siphon and leech health back, as well as play the range game much better than the other specializations, turning into a kind of necrotic Captain America if needed, though we'll be leaning more into the sustain part. It doesn't have the highest damage output, but it definitely has the highest sustain by far, and that can be very fun as you knock around enemies and stagger them like crazy. First, this build utilizes two cooldown abilities in Spectral Bulwark and Titan Stomp, but it does utilize its Rage to cast Reaper. There's an item that will remove Rage costs and put your abilities on a cooldown, but for this build it's nice to have a spender, as warriors don't lose Rage for taking damage, which you can be doing, as because of Spectral Bulwark, the next hit you take will be drastically reduced in damage, and it deals damage back to the enemy and high stagger. Very useful in Nightmare. Also, I've enchanted it so its cooldown is 9 seconds faster. We then have Titan Stomp, and it's there to apply incredibly high stagger. It naturally has a high amount, plus the 75% extra from this enchantment. When the stagger bar fills, your enemies will be helpless until the bar empties, and you can do what you like with them and finish them off after. The skill applies Overwhelmed, though we rather have it on a target rather than detonate, as that increases the stagger they take. Your ability, Reaper, slashes at a target for 100 rage or 2 rage pips, it detonates the weakened effect, and it applies Siphoned. This is a set and forget effect that slowly heals you back up as the dot deals damage to the enemy. Your ultimate is one of the flashiest in the game and also applies the Siphoned effect, meaning that yes, this build will be constantly healing. You also have the strongest rage attack out of all the warrior builds, as you can charge your shield toss 3 stages. It deals necrotic effect on hit, bounces an insane amount of times, or explodes if you choose to activate that mode. Ranged options in Nightmare are needed, as you can't always be in melee range, especially against some bosses. Out of all the builds, this will have the most health and defense, meaning that it's the most forgiving. Necrotic damage you deal heals you, as well as penetrates defenses with a passive, and with another, you deal more damage the lower your health and your enemy's health is, meaning that you'll start hitting very hard the more you and your opponent's backs against the wall. In a duel, you'll just be getting stronger and stronger. You're also not at all reliant on gear with this build, meaning you can come online with just your skills and not with finding specific pieces. Now, when it comes to the negatives, the Grim Reaper in the room is that the build does necrotic damage. This is a bad damage type to focus on because there are so many Darkspawn in the game. However, you also use physical damage with this build, and necrotic is just bonus damage. Also, necrotic damage you deal will heal you with a passive later on by restoring 2% of your health, and it will also gain penetration. You'll still be doing high physical and stagger damage along with this, and it was a toss-up, pun intended, between the Shield Throw Reaper or the Champion build, but this came out on top because the Champion relies too heavily on fire damage even though it's so good against Darkspawn. The Champion can solo Nightmare as well though. Also note that with a single weak point hit, we gain flaming weapons, meaning that we also have a way to hit Darkspawn if we need. Now, though this is the tankiest build, it also outputs the lowest damage out of the 3 builds. You'll feel sluggish at times with the 2-hander, so stick to a shield and 1-hander most times so you can attack fast and block when needed. Though you should always be aiming to parry. Since your output is slower, you may struggle with getting overwhelmed in some situations, but that's why retreating and shield tossing becomes so invaluable, and you'll start doing more damage as you get low, making this edge out the Champion in my opinion. Like the Deathcaller build, this build does come online with the specialization, but it's not as reliant as the Deathcaller. Its reliance is around the middle point. I don't have a build video on the Reaper like mentioned, so let's go through these skills I recommend, starting from the middle and heading bottom right. We pick up the aforementioned Spectral Bulwark, we then make our way up, getting Electric Armorer for the extra shield toss bounces. Just make sure to have different weights on your helm and armor pieces. I have a light and medium. We then get Bloody Advance, which we can use until we replace it with Reaper. We then get Master Throw, and at this point, we can't invest in the specialization as we won't be level 20. So instead, get Titan Stomp to the north of the starting area for reasons already stated. Then look around the board for nodes that help with your build, focusing on duration abilities so Reaper and Spectral Bulwark can be upgraded. There are nodes that increase your defense, increase the amount of necrotic and siphon stacks, and more. You may even notice a nice side effect of our path is getting flaming weapons once we hit a weak point, which shouldn't be hard to do with a single shield toss, meaning that Darkspawn will start melting. So once level 20 unlocks, grab every node you can except Reckless Shot, which doesn't apply to us. We'll also pick up the Ultimate and Reap, making us more tanky. One side will unlock at level 30 and the other at 40, so I'd go south before north so you can pick up Living Decay and make it so necrotic damage now heals you and penetrates their defenses. Pick up everything else when you can, and in the meantime, pick up all you see in this tree. You'll have plenty of points left over, so put them in areas that buff your ability tags, duration and strike, with the others being secondary. Now in terms of gear, it's actually up to you. You can hard focus on necrotic damage, though I think spreading out what you're doing works too. This build doesn't rely on gear at all, so feel free to experiment. You can get more of the Black City, for example, just like the Saboteur, since you relish in being low health, but something like Call of the Hall works too. I've leaned a bit into staggered damage, though you might find on Nightmare you can't trigger it as much as you'd like. If that's the case, you can pivot to a necrotic build or even pivot into a very defensive or charge focused build. This is the least gear focused of the 3, the same goes for gear enchantments. In terms of companions, you can use 2 mages that apply weakened, but always go with Emmerich as he simply works too well with this build. You could also use a rogue, Lucanus or Harding to detonate Overwhelmed, meaning 2 ways to combo with your Titan Stomp and Reaper. Emmerich is core and I would choose Lucanus next. When it comes to Emmerich's skills, pick up Entangling Spirits. With Unfinished Business, he'll fire them off passively, giving you more opportunities to combo as you can manually cast the ability as well. Next you'll want to heal, so invest in his. Then you can use the Bell Tolls for its final passive on the right, which lowers enemies' necrotic resistances, or you can use a Time Slow for more breathing room. Naturally, this is the best hero of the Veilguard passive and armor piece choice, so be sure to make the choice that gets you these. When it comes to Lucanus, you want to Eviscerate first as it detonates Overwhelmed, though keep in mind you'll want to get some use out of the Overwhelmed effect first before detonating. With Demonic Daggers, it also applies bleeding and necrosis. Then you want to get his Adrenaline Rush ability with impeccable timing. It automatically casts for you, giving you enhanced damage during the fight and leaving his cooldowns ready to cast and eviscerate. Also with Ability Rush, you get 50 rage when it passively activates, which is insane. His third skill isn't required. but get the heal if he isn't hardened, or get Abominate if hardened for barrier damage and knockdown. I like hardening Lucanus because he's better on offense rather than support. Naturally, this is the best hero of the Veilguard passive and armor piece choice. Now, how do you play this build? Well, it's simple. Don't charge in unless you need to. Instead, charge your shield and get some Captain America style bounces and weak point hits to set your flaming weapons effect up and get other advantages. Advantages being what the game calls buffs. You want to then use your standard and charged attacks to damage enemies and your bulwark to mitigate damage and deal it right back. Stomp big groups of enemies to spread stagger, then when your rage is at 100 or more, reap your helpless enemies to start regenerating life back. Don't be afraid to roll away and shield toss from range, or remain at range until forced to retreat. You can always deflect incoming range attacks back with a well-timed parry. Save your ultimate for when enemies are grouped up or you're in trouble health-wise. And that's it. Try to heavy attack enemies off cliffs when you can and just bully everyone. So those are the 3 builds I recommend for Nightmare difficulty. What do you think? Have any tips or builds of your own? Let me know below. Thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video, and thanks to you for watching. I really do appreciate it, guys. It means a lot to me. For everything RPG, you're in the right place. Ciao, friends.